Hello and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new, and you most likely are, so if you are, you should probably just subscribe because I think you'll like it here. I don't know. So I am back here with another video, and I want to talk about the very short period of time that I spent working for one of North America's biggest coffee chains. I don't think I can get sued for disclosing it, so if this video gets edited after being uploaded, that's why. But I was a barista at Starbucks for 4 months, and I would like the record to show that I have zero clue why I did 4 like this instead of like this. I have never ever in my life gone 4 like this until that day. I have no clue. I had a lot of great experiences. I made some videos about working there, which you can find up here. I wanted to talk about it because I've noticed, especially at American stores, they've been treating their employees pretty badly, especially after the mask mandate was lifted, and partners in the US are having a really hard time, especially given that although they're allowed to unionize, they keep getting shut down, and that really irks me and was definitely a factor in why I left. We did not have any representation, and especially after they took away the COVID benefits while the pandemic was still in full force. Here it's still in full force. It was one of the reasons that I looked for another job and left, because we had no protection and no representation, and corporate could do whatever they wanted without taking the actual experiences of working in the cafes. So I want to talk a bit about the things that I actually couldn't talk about until I left, and I haven't talked about it for so long because I wanted to make sure that there was enough time that had passed so that I could reflect on it through a bit of a more like healed and objective lens, but also to make sure that I didn't get in trouble. I didn't get in trouble for it. I have my notes app and we will get started. I started there in May 2020. I was supposed to start back in March, but everything shut down for 3 months or 2 months, and that didn't happen. So I worked there just as, I think like the second week that things had started opening up, my start date rolled around, and I was so excited. I have been going to Starbucks since I was like 12, so it was a huge deal for me. I was really excited, and I had this like huge like romanticized kind of ideal of what it would be like. I was working there before the mask mandate even came into play in Ontario, or in Toronto. Like, you do not have to wear a mask, and we as the baristas did. Anybody who worked as a food service employee had to wear a mask, but anybody who came in did not have to wear a mask, and for the most part people weren't wearing masks because they did not have to at all. Especially during that period, men were especially creepy about the masks. I would work a lot on cash because it was my favorite rotation. On POS, I was good at selling and I felt comfortable, and it was always like kind of the best point to talk to people, and that's just what I enjoyed most about the job, was talking to people. Before the mask mandate came into place, typically when customers walked in, they would see me first, and I would not be able to take off my mask. I had to wear a mask, and there was this group of men that would come in pretty much every single day and get like the same order. I think it was like a double long espresso, and they would come in and be like,
"Oh, you have such nice eyes. Take off your mask so we can see the rest of your face."
And I'd be like, "No, I'm sorry, cannot take off my mask." And they would beg for me to take off my mask, and they'd be like,
"Just give us a pretty smile."
And I'd be like, "No, I'm not legally allowed to take off my mask." And this kind of went on for like months. Like, I think I worked at this specific store for like 2 months, and every single week they would come in. Every single week. No, every single day. Every day that I worked, they were in. And I would try to take the shifts that were in the morning so that I would specifically not have to see these customers. And I did file complaints with my supervisors and my shift supervisors, but it was impossible to get away from it. They weren't going to tell these people not to come to the store. They weren't going to tell these people to stop being creepy, because that wouldn't make the moment, and a big deal at Starbucks is making the moment right. And so even though there's something so wrong happening, the customer is still the priority, even if it's like harassing a barista, which is so annoying. At least that was my experience at this store. I also want to point out that like I don't feel that I emphasized enough how creepy it was, A, and B, my like shift supervisors were constantly making excuses for the men. Like they were like, oh, they're just playing around, they're just teasing you, blah blah blah, take it as a compliment. And it's like the first time maybe, but nearly every single shift, no. Because COVID was still kind of like new back then, a lot of people would come in and just debate or try to debate with us kind of all of the rules that we literally had no control over, especially the provincial rules. Like they would come in and be like, can't you just open up the like seating area, who cares? And it was like, well, we care, A, and B, like we literally cannot open anything other than the actual bar. Like you can't do anything but order, grab your drink and leave. And for like the longest time, people would stand there and we would have a barista kind of on the floor talking to the people who are waiting for their drinks. And almost every single day people would come in and just get so frustrated with us because they had to stay 6 feet apart, they had to stay on the stickers, and we couldn't even humor them in having a discussion because that could make the moment wrong, and you can never make the moment wrong. And so it was always such a struggle and it would be so awkward. But then we'd have like reviews with our supervisors or our managers, and they would tell us that like we weren't doing a good enough job at talking to the customers and like they would get like reviews and stuff saying that like we were cold because we wouldn't answer their COVID specific questions that we could not answer. So that was a little odd and really frustrating because you'd be standing there and people would be like,
oh, this is so annoying, like you guys are so stupid, I'm just gonna go to Tim Hortons.
And it's like, okay, go to Tim Hortons. Like my pay does not change and I would rather not have this conversation with you at all. There was this one time, and this was like my second week, they threw me on bar so fast, and I was on with my trainer. I was trying to make a s'mores frappuccino, and I just asked him to look over me because I didn't want to do anything wrong. It was like a young girl and I didn't want to ruin her day, so I was like, can you just look over me to make sure I'm doing everything wrong, or I mean to make sure I'm doing everything right? And he was like, absolutely. And he stood there and watched me, and I did it perfectly, and I handed off the drink, did a perfect handoff, and 2 minutes later the mom comes in and she's like,
can you please remake this drink? She made it wrong.
And we were like, my trainer was like, she didn't make it wrong, but we can absolutely make it for you, like remake it for you. Could you let us know what's wrong with it? And she was just like, there's just something wrong. And we were like, okay. So essentially this girl would come in, and whenever she noticed that somebody was new, because like we just take a little bit more time or there's somebody watching us, she would always come back and say that something was wrong and get a second one and ask to keep the first one. And for some reason we never took back the first ones, so she would get she'd get a free drink out of pretty much every single time she would come. And my last kind of pet peeve is I transferred to a store downtown shortly after I started working there, just because I was moving, and kind of when I got hired back like in March of 2020, the pandemic wasn't even a thing, and I did not know that I would be moving. I thought that I would be living in my grandparents' house again, but just things changed over time and I decided to move, and I let them know as soon as I knew that I was moving. I just kind of let them know there was a lot of reasons why I was moving, and I just let them know what was going on. They were obviously upset about it, but they let me go eventually. I found a store kind of close to where I live and just started working there, and I only worked there for about 2 weeks before I got my job that I have now. I'm an art student, so forgive me for the shitty math. I worked at my first store for 3.5 months, and then I worked at my new store for only like 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks maybe at most. I don't know how I got that confused in my notes. I was just kind of waiting to find a full-time job, but I couldn't commute because the commute from my apartment to my old store was like an hour and a half, and I just couldn't do that for $14 an hour. I transferred stores, and this one was in a particularly vulnerable area where there is a lot of struggles with homelessness and is around like a lot of like rehab facilities and homeless shelters and women's shelters. So we worked with a lot of like very vulnerable people, and there were a handful of people that would come into our store who unfortunately lived on the street, or when they could stayed in the shelters, but they would come in and ask for water, or if they could they would kind of take all the change that they could accumulate and buy a coffee. And whenever they would come in, there were specific members on the team who would get so angry. And it was one of those things where it's like, why would you get angry? Like, they're doing their best. Like, they need water. It was in the middle of August. Like, it's so hot in August. They need to stay hydrated. They do not have money. They do their best to pay when they can. And like, we're fortunate enough to be working in general and have access to food because this specific store would keep the almost expired or expired food for the partners. I don't think that was allowed. We had a whole basket full of food for free. We were lucky to have access to that. Like, we don't make much, but at least we have something, you know? And so these people would come in and ask for water, and they would always get mad and kick them out. Over time, a few of us were giving them food and stuff after work. We'd have a discount a lot of the times. My free drink after work was perfect. That's all I needed. I didn't need breakfast. I didn't need dinner. I didn't need food after I was working. And I would just take my free drink, buy a second one, and buy like a sandwich. And a lot of people would just give it to the homeless people because I just always felt so lucky. And I would get in trouble for taking the bare minimum and giving it to homeless people. Like, they were like, oh, don't do it. Like, they're like seagulls, they'll just keep coming back and begging for more. And I was like listen to yourself. Listen to yourself. It's so pathetic. We like, I don't even know. There were a couple of us that would do as much as we could, but we'd still get in trouble for it. They also wouldn't let these people use the bathroom, which was so upsetting because they don't have access to a bathroom during the day, because as far as I understood, the shelters kick people out during the day and they can only come back at night. And especially during COVID, when you cannot go anywhere, like the library is closed, most places don't even have bathrooms open, but we did, and they wouldn't even let them piss. Like, girl, imagine how lucky you have to be able to gatekeep who can pee in your store or who can get the free water from your store. Another point that I want to make is nobody can tell me, because one of the arguments I would get a lot when I talk about this is free water is only for customers. Do you understand how many times in high school I would prance on over to Starbucks and just get free water because I could go back to school with a clear cup with ice in it that says Starbucks, and people would think that I was cool? There were like a few other incidents of Starbucks saying that they give back to the community. My first store apparently did food donations with end of day food, so it wasn't actually at its expiry date, but because we had it on the shelf, we had to get rid of it at the end of the day. It was still perfectly safe to eat. The specific foods we were allowed to eat. And a local food bank would send us bags, and they would ask us to put the food in the bags, and then they would come pick it up. And for like the whole time that I was at the store, we never once actually sent a bag out. We always had all this food that we would literally throw in the trash that was still fine. We would never send it out. And whenever I asked about it, they were just like, oh, don't ask, don't tell, like, it's not a big deal, like, they don't need it, blah blah blah. Like, pardon me? There were a lot of good parts of working at Starbucks. I really enjoyed most of the people on my teams. I loved learning how to make the coffees and learning more about coffee. It's something that like I am passionate about now. It definitely helped that. It taught me a lot of great things. I'd worked in customer service and in food service before, but the training was definitely awesome from a corporate perspective. Like, all of that training was amazing, and the training for the stores was amazing and really taught me a lot. So I do feel lucky to have had that experience, and especially for the part of me that was romanticizing that job, I think that it really humbled me in a lot of ways, but definitely like kicked a kind of need that I had to do that. Like, I spent so many years applying to Starbucks, and I finally got it, and it wasn't what I anticipated, and that's perfectly okay. Not necessarily anybody's fault, but it definitely just opened my eyes. And especially now, like, reading through people who still work there as reviews of how things are going, I feel lucky that I got it when I did, but I also feel really thankful for the experience, and like I feel like it contributed to a lot of like my personal growth. So yeah, that's kind of my experience. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you work at Starbucks or have worked at Starbucks and have anything to say, positive or negative, leave it below. I'd love to hear kind of different takes on the subject. So yeah, anyways, that's it for today's video, and I will see you in my next one. Goodbye.